Joining us now, Ian Sams, senior national spokesperson for the Harris-Walz campaign, former White House official. Hey, Ian, it's great to see you. Thank you. I want to ask you, how is Vice President Harris preparing for this debate? Is she doing mocks in Pittsburgh now as well?
Look, she's preparing for this debate to share her vision of the country with the American people. A lot of times this might be the first time a lot of people hear from her on a debate stage. I think you mentioned the fact that the Trump campaign insisted on having the microphones muted in the debate on Tuesday night. I think that you can see that that's clearly a concentrated effort by President Trump to create a parameter to let him be more disciplined and more careful in his approach. I think people might be underestimating his ability in the debate, given the structure and format of those muted microphones. He lies so much that it's hard to fact check him in real time, whether you're a moderator or a candidate running against him. And so I think his handlers worked really hard to make sure that those mics stay muted to put him in a better position to be successful. I mean, this is his 7th general election presidential debate, probably the most of anybody in history. And Donald Trump's a showman, so we know he's going to come in ready to debate. And the vice president is preparing very hard to share with the country her vision for a new way forward and the very significant differences between she and President Trump in this campaign.
Well, you and the vice president know better than anyone, other than Joe Biden, how important, how significant these confrontations can be, for good or not. James Carville, Democratic guru, has suggested that she ought to be getting under his skin. And clearly what is working for you so far in the last couple of weeks is her ridicule, not taking his taunts seriously, sort of dismissing him and all of his disparaging insults, that she's not intelligent, and the remarks about gender, which she didn't respond to in that one-on-one interview. Is that the game plan, to just kind of dismiss him and prompt him to go off message, prompt him to be less disciplined?
Well, I think what's really challenging and unfortunate about this debate format is that it limits the vice president's ability to prosecute the political case against President Trump. People remember so clearly in the Senate when she would have Trump officials or judicial nominees in front of the Judiciary Committee, the way she's able to incisively question someone to try to draw out the truth and really put facts on the table. Unfortunately, because of the insistence by Trump's campaign to have the microphones muted, up to what we believe was threatening to pull out of the debate, we thought the debate was more important to have so the American people can see the choice. But it is unfortunate that she won't be able to go after him with that sort of prosecutorial line of questioning to hold him accountable in this debate. We know he's going to try to mislead the country about where he stands. We know he's going to push negative attacks on the vice president. But she's going to be ready to tell the American people the truth, to respond to his claims about her, and to share her vision with the country. But I think it does create a challenge that we aren't going to be able to have the ability to sort of go directly at these claims made by President Trump, or to try to hold him accountable for his own misstatements and, frankly, offensive sort of attacks against her.
Now, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, famously, of course, the co-chair of the January 6th investigation, just endorsed Kamala Harris last night. Here's what she had to say at Duke University.
I don't believe that we have the luxury of writing in candidates' names, particularly in swing states. And as a conservative, as someone who believes in and cares about the Constitution, I have thought deeply about this. And because of the danger that Donald Trump poses, not only am I not voting for Donald Trump, but I will be voting for Kamala Harris in this election.
How do you think that the Liz Cheney endorsement might help you?
Well, look, Congresswoman Cheney is a patriot, and I think in the last 5 years, we've seen over and over again her put country over party, or as John McCain would say, to put country first. And I think that the vice president really respects these Republicans, these true conservatives who are having the courage to speak out and to say that what we see from President Trump is unacceptable, and we can't select him in this election. We have to choose a new way forward. We have to turn the page on what he has represented, the chaos, the division, the erosion of our freedoms and constitutional ideals. You know, she welcomes the support of anyone in this country who is tired of what President Trump is offering. And I think that she's offering a big, bold, inclusive vision for any voter, whether you're on the right, left, or somewhere in between, to support her. And so, you know, we think that this is momentum that we can keep up right now with Republicans who are speaking up and coming out and saying that they're going to support Vice President Harris. We welcome them in this campaign, and we hope this is a campaign that they can believe in.